So to build up a little hype in terms of MLS Cup that's going to be happening on Saturday, I'm going to do some MLS Cup related kind of content leading up to the game on Saturday. And what I'm going to do for the next 2 days is that I'm going to look at the entire season of both teams that will be in MLS Cup this season. I'll take a look at the entire season of Atlanta United, of how they got to MLS Cup through this entire season that they've gone through. And I'll do the same thing with the Portland Timbers. And I believe on Wednesday I will do news of the week. And on Friday, I think that is when I do the preview. And the preview is going to be very long. Well, it won't be super long like what I usually do with previews and reviews, where I review like 15 games in each match week, but it's still going to be long, okay? Probably about maybe 15 or 20 minutes. But yeah, let's actually talk about Atlanta United and talk about how exactly they got into MLS Cup. And remember, a lot of people, whenever they talk about Atlanta United, they always said that, it's been an incredible season for them, and that it just felt like every single game they were going to win that game. Well, first of all, I will say this about Atlanta. They definitely are a very good team, and they, of course, almost broke the record that TFC had last season in terms of the best team ever in MLS history. Unfortunately, that record, which was also broken by the Red Bulls, and the fact that they lost the Supporter Shield to the Red Bulls because of not able to kind of win this final game, and that they kind of lost it on the final day. Atlanta, there were at times where they kind of had to face some adversity, and most of them come right near the end. But what the first real big adversity I think they had to face throughout this season actually was the first game of the season. So all the way back in March, when Atlanta played against Houston on the road, they lost 4-0. And I believe they were 4-0 down at halftime. And I'll tell you what, there was a lot of panic going on in the Atlanta United fan base. And even after this game, a lot of the media was just slating that Atlanta United is probably going to have a second-year syndromes, and that this is just going to be a complete it's going to be a complete fluke of what they did in the first year, and that the second year they're going to take one step back. But little did we know that was only a time where, I think Atlanta probably wasn't really quite prepared heading into the season. And this is exactly why you don't just judge a team's season after one game. Because in MLS, it's a long season. And even though this was a horrific loss by Atlanta, and you could argue this is probably, alongside with this game, was the worst performance we have seen Atlanta United, you don't judge them just by one game. And they definitely proved that to everybody, because after that horrific loss to Houston, they went on an 8-game unbeaten streak, and they won 7 of the 8 games. They first started this 8-game unbeaten streak by beating DC United 3-1, and this was actually the first time they have ever beaten DC United. DC United, for whatever reason last season, were able to beat Atlanta, and they were really the only team that was able to convincingly beat Atlanta. Like, they beat them 3 times that they have faced each other, and DC was dead last season. I mean, don't ask me how that is the way it goes, other than the fact that I'll just say that is very typical MLS, of how you think something shouldn't happen, but then it happens, because it's MLS logic. That's what it is. But they finally beat them for the first time in the second week of the season, and then they of course won 4-1 against Vancouver. And this game kind of just give you a quick snapshot of the fact that Atlanta is back, and that Atlanta is going to be a team that whenever they're playing at home, they are going to absolutely destroy opponent, and that it is just going to be a free scoring team. Now, on the other hand, when they go on the road for the second time where they won 1-0, many people, they were kind of still a little bit concerned. The fact that Atlanta wasn't looking very convincingly on the road. And throughout this season, Atlanta, I don't think at one time where on the road they kind of show the same kind of intensity and the way they were when they're playing at home. And, that of course could happen to most MLS team because playing on the road in MLS is definitely not very easy. But what I've been so impressed with Atlanta this season in terms of on the road is that despite the fact that they don't play that pretty soccer that they always play at home, they still somehow find a way to grind out result. And you see it with all these road games this season, they're able to grind out those result. And even though at times it isn't pretty, like this 1-0 win against Minnesota, at the end of the day, if you get 3 points, then that's all it matters. It doesn't matter how pretty it has to be. So that of course start the trend of them being kind of a grind out team on the road. And then very next week when they head back home, they once again put on their kind of flashing kind of jersey that they have and just absolutely destroy LAFC 5-0. And I think this one was probably one of the biggest statements that they have made early part of the season, mainly because LAFC at that time was very, very good. And, 5-0. That was definitely, like, not a lot of people saw this one coming, with them just absolutely steamroll LAFC, considering the fact that LAFC was doing very well to begin their season. And then in the very next match, a match that at that time was considered a heavyweight kind of matchup because both Atlanta and NYCFC were in the top two, and it turns out this game ended at 2-2. And this was a game that at time we were talking about it was potentially be a preview of the Eastern Conference Final. Unfortunately, it never did kind of materialize, and in fact it was actually only the preview of the Eastern Conference semifinal, and we saw how the Eastern Conference semifinal went. It wasn't really close whatsoever. But then they went on the road again, and again they grind out a result against the Galaxy 2-0. And then once they go back at home at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they once again thrash Montreal 4-1. On the road, they of course once again grind out a resort against the Fire 2-1. And then back at home when they play against Sporting KC, they did suffer their first loss since the opening day weekend, and it did finally put an end to the 8-game unbeaten streak when they lose 2-0 to Sporting KC. And Atlanta's, I wouldn't say this season at home they are that bad, but I would think that they could have done better in terms of at home. And they did lose a couple of home games. I think this one and then this one. Actually, I think these two are the only 2 times that Atlanta has actually lost at home. But there was also a couple of draws that they have at home. So it's not like they're immortal at home whatsoever. And there were a couple of surprising results in terms of those home draws that they have. And, the very next game, they, of course, play Orlando City, which they won 2-1 because, whenever Atlanta play Orlando City, even though it sounds like a rivalry, it's not. It's a very one-sided rivalry. And I think this was the game where Orlando City was absolutely fuming at the ref, and the Orlando City fans just completely lost their mind at the end and completely trashed the field, which is something that LAFC fans are probably proud of that. I know. I try my best not to try to bring that up, and now LAFC fans gonna probably dislike this video, and the same goes with Orlando City fans too, with me mentioning about that. But hey, they trashed the field in this game. They were absolutely up in arms of what happened in this game. Now, was Atlanta kind of got a little bit help with the referee in this game? A little bit. There was definitely calls in this game that probably should have not gone in favor of Atlanta, and they kind of got away with some fouls that should have been called. But at the same time, Orlando City just thinking that it was just completely unfair of what Atlanta does. And even though I thought that game Atlanta was still the better team, even with the referee decision going in favor of them, Orlando City fans don't think So, two. And then heading into the next week, they lost to the Red Bulls 3-1. And, this also kind of started the trend of them just for some reason cannot beat the Red Bulls. And it wasn't until at the vital moment of the Eastern Conference final where they finally able to beat the Red Bulls, which I think I'll kind of mention it again once I get to the end of this video. And then talking about the surprising draw, well, this was one of them. They drew 1-1 to the Revs, and I know this game is on the road, but you would think that Atlanta was able to somehow grind a result on the road, which unfortunately they didn't against a New England team that wasn't very good this year. But they were able to, once they go back at home or on the road again, and actually this is wrong. This is actually backwards. Philly did not beat Atlanta. I mean, that would have been a very surprising result. But Atlanta, of course, was able to, actually, I think they were actually at home in this game. So they actually won 3-1 at home instead of winning 3-1 on the road. I kind of made a mistake right here on June 2nd. But after that, they drew 1-1 against NYCFC. Again, this was also a matchup that a lot of people were paying attention to because it was a rematch of what we saw in April, and what we saw in April was a very entertaining match, and everybody was waiting for this to happen again. And although this match wasn't as entertaining as this one, a lot of people were already saying that Eastern Conference Final, NYCFC versus Atlanta United, that will really kind of decide who's going to go to MLS Cup and who's going to represent the Eastern Conference team in MLS Cup. But after that, they win on the road against Columbus 2-0, and then they drew 1-1 in their only match against Portland this year, which they of course will face in MLS Cup. And I think this was also at a point where Portland was on a 15-game unbeaten streak, which of course we'll talk about tomorrow. But Portland was red hot coming into this game, and Atlanta, they weren't really red hot. They were kind of like hot and cold at times, but this was obviously going to be a very tough kind of task for Atlanta to potentially win against a team that was the hottest team in MLS at that time. And it will be interesting to see how it's going to happen in MLS Cup with Portland. I think coming into MLS Cup, they're kind of also a very hot team too, considering the fact that they also won a couple of games heading into the MLS Cup, and especially what they did in the playoffs. But after that, they once again thrashed Orlando City 4-0, because whenever Atlanta versus Orlando City face each other, Atlanta is going to win, no matter what. But then they hit a speed bump on the 4th of July when they lost 3-2 against FC Dallas, and this was back when FC Dallas was looking like a team that could potentially challenge for MLS Cup and the teams that's going to come out in the Western Conference as the one that's going to represent the Western Conference in MLS Cup. Obviously, we know what happened to FC Dallas later in this season. And then they, of course, beat Philly again 2-0 this time, and then they drew 1-1 against Seattle, and this was also at the time when Seattle was really getting their stuff together and that they were really started to go on a very long unbeaten run of their own. So again, this was also a very tough match for Atlanta to face, which they were able to get a 1-1 result. And then they of course won 3-1 again against DC United. They go on the road against Montreal again, and they won 2-1. And then when they play against TFC, and this was certainly one of the most disappointing match for Atlanta, because they had a 2-1 lead in this game, and it looked like they were going to potentially get another 3 points. Nope, they concede a late goal, and they drop 2 points in this game, and they end up drawing 2-2 in this game. And also TFC was down to 10 men in this game, although that 10 man advantage actually came right near the end of the game, so it wasn't really a man advantage for Atlanta in this game, despite the fact that TFC did went down to 10 men. And then they went back to winning ways by beating Columbus 3-1. And then you know what's going to happen when they play Orlando City. They, of course, is going to win. And I believe this is also the game when Joseph Martinez broke that record. He got his 28th goal of the season, which broke the record that BWP and Chris Wando holds back in 2012 and 2014. And then just as they come back to, or actually they stay on the road once again, and after just such an emotional kind of win against Orlando City, they kind of fell flat against DC United. But then again, this was another instant where DC United was a very hot team, and they were just absolutely unbeatable at Audi Field. And really, some of the losses and some of the points dropped by Atlanta, they dropped against points on opponent that were kind of like on a hot streak, or they're just really good. And I think that was where, I think at point of this season where I talk about I talk about Atlanta, of how, you know, yes, they are among one of the best team in the league, but when they do play against good opponent, like let's say NYCFC, Portland, Seattle, TFC, well, no, not TFC actually, but Sporting KC, the Red Bulls, they haven't really shown that they've been able to get points against them. And I think the only good team that they beat was LAFC. And yeah, I think that's it. The only good team that they beat throughout that part is LAFC, because, you know, the other team that they beat were kind of mediocre and not very good. But, you know, heading into the last month, well, not the last month, but heading into this last column here, then they were able to recover from that defeat against DC United by winning 3-0 against the Rapids, and then they controversially beat the Quakes 4-3 on the road. And to this day, I'm still very bitter about this game, especially what happens with the fact that we should have been up 4-1 instead of being 3-2 in that game. Never forget, by the way. But moving on into the next one, they were able to win again by beating RSL 2-0 at home. But then they lose on the road against the Red Bulls. And really, at this point, Atlanta was kind of in control of the Supporter Shield. And, you know, the Red Bulls were really kind of started to catch them a little bit. I think at one point, Atlanta hold a 10-point lead in terms of the Supporter Shield. But because of the fact that they dropped some of these points and the fact that the Red Bulls was just red hot, yeah, this was really kind of something that we're going to potentially see Atlanta lose out in the Supporter Shield. And have they not lose this game, and have they maybe get a draw in this game, I believe Atlanta would have won the Supporter Shield, because the Red Bulls were only crowned as Supporter Shield by only 1 point. So Atlanta would have won the Supporter Shield if they would have just draw against the Red Bulls. And also, this was actually the game where Miguel Almiron also went down, and things got really murky for Atlanta after that. And also, this is where the rumors about Tata Martino leaving Atlanta United, which eventually he was announced that he was leaving Atlanta United in this Atlanta versus Chicago game. And that's when things kind of went a little bit south for Atlanta United, and things are really just, it looked like this could be problem heading into the playoffs. But they still, of course, were able to grind out 2-1 wins against the Revs and also against Chicago Fire. And this is when it looked like things were falling apart, when they lost 4-1 to Atlanta, or not Atlanta United, but to TFC. And at that point, everybody was saying that Atlanta might be in some trouble heading into the playoffs, considering the fact that they weren't really in a very good form. And we don't know exactly how good will Miguel Almiron once he come back to the team, or if he's going to be healthy enough to come back to this Atlanta United team. But like I said earlier about how when Atlanta got absolutely destroyed in the beginning part of the season, and I think this is also another pattern that I've seen with Atlanta United this season, is that just as you think that after a brutal defeat that they look like they are falling apart, they prove everybody wrong. Because in the playoffs, when they play against NYCFC, they won the first leg 1-0, and then in the second leg, they pretty much just cruised their way into the Eastern Conference Final by beating NYCFC 3-1 at home. And then when they play against the Red Bulls, there was still a lot of question whether or not they can beat the Red Bulls, considering the fact that the Red Bulls never lost to Atlanta, and that the Red Bulls has a very good record against Atlanta, and this might be the moment where Atlanta would potentially not succeed. Nope. Instead, they basically put all that conversation to just pretty much just shut a lot of people up by winning 3-0 against the Red Bulls, and really at that point, that was game, set, and match in terms of them knowing that they're going to be going to MLS Cup. And even though they did lose 1-0 to the Red Bulls in the second leg, and even though in the second leg they spent more time parking the bus than actually attacking, they still are able to move on into MLS Cups. So yeah, there you go. That is the overview of how exactly Atlanta is able to get into the MLS Cup at this point of the stage. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? And obviously I'm not going to really talk a lot about MLS Cup in this video or in the next one or in the news of the week, because I want to save that for the preview. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I will see you guys next time.